Imagine this, reaching an age when you should be able to rest a little, look back in peace, and feel that even though not everything was perfect, you did what you could. It should be a time to feel nostalgic for the beautiful moments and the warmth of family, to remember them like sitting around the table after a family lunch, a warm place in the memories of the mind. But then your own child appears and turns your memory into a courtroom, your effort into evidence of guilt, and their failure into a sentence against you. Who is ruling your life in that moment, your conscience or the version they need you to believe? How painful words can be, especially when they come from a child. It hurts. Guilt has a cruel way of entering a parent's heart because it does not strike from the outside. It strikes by using love as the key. And that is why the 7 lies a selfish child uses to make you feel guilty for their failure can seem reasonable, even fair, when in reality they are rewriting your story so you keep paying a debt that does not belong to you. The problem is not loving a child. The problem is allowing that love to be used to erase your clarity, your calm, your peace, and most importantly, the love you have for your child and everything you gave them. In this video, you will learn to recognize those 7 phrases, not so you can become cold or live with resentment, but so you can break the spell with clarity, character, and inner mastery. Stoicism, a wisdom more than 2,000 years old, was not born to decorate ancient books, but to help you stand firm when guilt, emotional blackmail, and fear try to make decisions for you. Stay until the end, because the last lie looks like weakness, but it may be the hardest chain to break. Before we fully get into this topic, you can now find the Self-Respect Library, 5 books of Stoic wisdom to recognize patterns, set boundaries, and make yourself respected. I'll leave the link in the description. Now, let's begin. There is a phrase that can fall on a father or mother like a stone thrown against an old window. It does not only strike the present, it also shatters the image of everything that was lived. If you hadn't raised me like that, my life would be different. And suddenly years of work, sleepless nights, difficult decisions, human mistakes, sincere attempts, and silent sacrifices are reduced to a simple, convenient, and devastating accusation. We have reached the first point of this journey, and it is the lie that rewrites your past to justify their present. This phrase is powerful because it does not attack one specific act. It attacks your entire story. It does not say, "You were wrong about this," which would be human, debatable, and maybe even necessary to examine. What it does is turn your entire way of raising them into the root of their failure. It is a very skillful emotional move, even when it comes wrapped in pain, anger, or apparent honesty. The selfish child takes their current life, their problems, their frustrations, their poor decisions, and presents them as living proof that you failed. So you do not just hear a complaint, you hear a sentence. And of course, a parent's heart is fertile ground for that seed, because no honest parent looks back and says they did everything perfectly. There are always scenes that hurt, words that could have been said better, silences that weigh heavily, moments of exhaustion, boundaries that may have been too harsh or too weak. That normal imperfection becomes the perfect hook. The selfish child does not need to invent a completely false life. It is enough to take your real mistakes, magnify them, remove them from context, and use them as the total explanation for their present. A fairly convenient move, by the way. They keep the role of victim, and you carry the entire bill. Epictetus, that freed slave who understood the power of inner judgment like few others, taught that it is not events that disturb men, but the interpretations they make of them. This idea is decisive here, because one thing is to recognize that your upbringing influenced their life, as every childhood influences every human being, and something very different is to accept that their adult life no longer belongs to them because you made mistakes. Between influence and condemnation, there is an abyss, and many selfish children live comfortably in that abyss, using the past as an excuse to avoid taking responsibility for the present. Think about it calmly. How many more years must your punishment last for not having been a perfect parent? Until when should a mistake you made 20 or 30 years ago serve as permission for them not to mature today? Because that is the part almost no one says out loud. The accusation is not necessarily seeking to understand the past. It seeks to freeze it. It seeks to keep it open like a useful wound, a wound that is pulled out every time money, forgiveness, rescue, tolerance, or a new chance is needed. And if you accept that frame, you end up living as a permanent defendant in a case that never closes. The past can explain some wounds, but it cannot be used forever to absolve a lack of character. An adult may have had shortcomings, difficulties, hard moments, even legitimate wounds, and still have responsibility for what they do with their life. That is the uncomfortable part, because maturity begins when a person stops using what happened to them as an excuse to destroy what they can still build. But the selfish child does not want to get there too quickly. It suits them better to keep you looking backward, because while you are reviewing your guilt, they avoid reviewing their decisions. Breaking this lie does not mean denying your mistakes. It means refusing to let your mistakes be turned into a life sentence. You can honestly tell yourself that you were not perfect, that perhaps there were things you would do differently today, that there were limits, absences, or clumsy moments typical of a human being trying to raise a child the best they could. But you can also recognize something just as true. Their adult life can no longer continue being managed through your guilt. Now that we have understood how the past can be manipulated, it is time to look at the next tool that usually appears when direct guilt is not enough. Pay attention to this. When a selfish child discovers that blaming you for the past no longer breaks you down the way it used to, they usually change the scene. They no longer accuse you only through family history. Now they place you in a kind of invisible competition with other parents. My friend's parents do help them. The phrase seems simple, almost ordinary, but it carries a very calculated humiliation inside it, making you feel like less of a parent for not giving what others supposedly give. And so we enter the second point of this video, the lie that uses social comparison to humiliate you. Comparison has a particular force because it does not merely ask. It measures you. It belittles you. It places you before an imaginary court where other parents seem more generous, more modern, more understanding, more capable, more loving. It hardly matters whether those examples are real, exaggerated, or completely invented. What matters is the effect they have on you. Suddenly, you are no longer evaluating whether you should help or not, whether that help is fair or harmful, whether you have the resources, the energy, or the limits. You are defending your worth as a parent against someone else's image, one that may not even exist. This lie works because it touches a very human wound, the fear of not having been enough. A parent may resist a direct request, but when that request comes with comparison, something shifts inside. Maybe I'm being too harsh. Maybe others do it better. Maybe if I don't help, they'll think I don't love them. And that is where the decision stops coming from reason and starts coming from shame. You no longer give because you believe it is right. You give so you will not feel inferior. A lovely way to call emotional defeat love. The irony is that those comparisons are usually carefully selected. Your child does not tell you about the parent who set boundaries, the one who let their adult child solve their own problems, the one who said no in order not to feed irresponsibility. No, what a coincidence. The example is always the friend whose parents pay, lend, rescue, buy, tolerate, or make things easier. The comparison never seeks the whole truth. It seeks pressure. It is a staged display designed so you look at what others supposedly give and forget to look at what you have already given for years. And here it is worth taking an inner pause. Since when is a parent's love measured against someone else's wallet, house, or permissiveness? Since when does your moral duty depend on what another family does, with another history, other resources, other problems, and other consequences? Social comparison is a trap because it pulls you away from your own reality. It forces you to decide from a scene you do not know. Maybe those parents help because they can. Maybe they help because they do not know how to say no. Maybe they are being manipulated just like you. Maybe their child only tells the part that suits them, but of course, that part is never included in the report. Public shame, even when it happens inside a private conversation, has a deep effect. It makes you feel watched, judged, outdated, selfish, incapable of measuring up. And a selfish child knows how to use that with precision. They may say it with anger, with sadness, with sarcasm, or with a calmness that hurts more than a shout. What matters is planting the idea that your boundary is not a legitimate decision, but a moral failure. That way, if you do not give, you are not being prudent. You are being worse than others. If you hesitate, you are not evaluating, you are proving your coldness. If you draw a line, you are not protecting your dignity. You are falling below the standard of supposedly perfect parents. But a clear-minded parent does not compete in that race. You do not have to prove love by imitating the behavior of others. You do not have to buy respect with borrowed comparisons. Your question should not be what your child's friends' parents do, but what your help is producing in your child's life. Whether it strengthens them, puts them in order, makes them responsible, brings them closer to a more mature life. And if the answer is no, then the comparison loses its authority. Because no outside example should push you into funding a dynamic that you already know weakens them and wears you down. Firmness begins when you stop feeling humiliated for not taking part in an absurd competition. Other parents will have their story, their fears, their resources, and their mistakes. You have to answer to your conscience. And if your conscience begins to awaken, you will understand that saying no in the face of comparison does not make you less of a parent. It may be exactly what restores the place that guilt was trying to take from you. Once we have seen this, the next step is to recognize what happens when they no longer blame you only for their life, but also for every bond they themselves destroy. Notice this. There comes a moment when the accusation stops being buried in childhood and begins to spread like a stain over everything your child touches. If they have problems with their partner, you did something wrong. If they argue at work, you raised them that way. If they lose friendships, you damaged their character. If they manage their money poorly, you did not teach them. And then you are no longer just the imperfect parent from their past. You are the universal explanation for every present failure. We have reached the third point of this journey. You're to blame for my problems with other people, the lie that turns you into the scapegoat for every relationship they ruin. This lie is dangerous because it turns your conscience into an emotional dumping ground. Everything they do not want to look at in themselves ends up being placed on you. Their impatience, their lack of commitment, their irresponsibility, their outbursts, the way they treat others, their inability to maintain bonds or keep agreements. Everything finds a convenient exit when your name appears. They no longer need to ask themselves how they speak, how they respond, how they demand, how they hurt, how they manipulate, or how they abandon. It is enough to point at you and say the root is in the upbringing, in the example, in the home, in that time, in that argument, in that absence. How convenient, isn't it? If everything comes from you, then they are free from examining what they continue repeating today. The scapegoat always serves the same purpose, carrying the tension that someone else does not know how to put in order. In families, that figure is often someone who loves too much to defend themselves coldly. A father, a mother, someone who hears an accusation and before responding is already searching their guilt inside. The selfish child knows, even if they do not always admit it, that there is an open door there. They know that if they connect their current disaster to your past, you will stop. You will doubt. You will try to explain. You will look for nuances. And while you get lost in defending yourself, they avoid the question that truly matters. What are they doing now with their own life? Marcus Aurelius left a teaching that fits this point with precision. If someone despises you, examine whether what they say is true. If it is, correct yourself, and if it is not, let their words return to them. He did not write this to feed pride, but to train discernment. Because there are criticisms that contain a portion of truth and deserve to be heard, but there are also accusations that only seek to transfer responsibility. Clarity consists of distinguishing one from the other. Maybe you failed at something. Maybe there were real shortcomings. Maybe there were wounds that should not be denied. But that does not mean you have to carry every relationship your child breaks, every job they lose, every person they disappoint, or every conflict they create. Think about it calmly. Are you inside their mouth when they respond with contempt? Are you inside their hand when they sign a debt they cannot pay? Are you inside their character when they promise to change and go back to the same thing? A parent influences, of course a parent influences. But influencing is not the same as eternally governing the adult will of a child. If they are old enough to demand, complain, compare you, and judge you, they are also old enough to take responsibility for how they treat others. It is curious how some children declare themselves adults when they ask for freedom, but declare themselves children again when it is time to face consequences. A very selective kind of maturity, quite practical for someone who does not want to pay the price of their actions. Accepting this lie steals something deeper than money or peace of mind. It steals your clarity, because you begin to look at every one of their problems as if it were your file. They call you saying things ended badly with someone, and you no longer hear only a story. You hear an accusation in advance. They tell you they lost an opportunity, and you begin to wonder where you failed. They talk to you about their loneliness, their anger, their debts, their isolation, and you feel that everything falls once again onto the same inner table where you have been judging yourself for years. That is how a parent ends up aging, not because of the years, but because of carrying battles that were never theirs. The selfish child needs you to keep confusing compassion with total responsibility, because if you stop carrying the burden, they will have to look somewhere else. They will have to observe their character, their treatment of others, their discipline, their decisions, their patterns, and that weighs more than blaming you. That is why many times they will insist. They will return to the old scene, to the harsh phrase, to the parenting mistake, to the memory they know disarms you. Not because they want to understand everything, but because that memory serves as a key to open your guilt, again and again, until you confuse listening with surrendering. Breaking this pattern requires calm firmness. You can recognize what was yours without taking ownership of what is not. You can tell yourself internally that there were mistakes, but also limits. You can accept that their story began with you, but not accept that their entire destiny must remain your condemnation. Because an adult child who destroys bonds and then presents you as the only cause is not seeking truth. They are seeking a place to hide from themselves. And when you stop being that hiding place, something begins to change. But if this already seems clear, we still need to look at the phrase that turns love into a debt without end. Few phrases are as effective at disarming a parent as this one. If you really loved me, you would do this for me. On the surface, it speaks of love, but deep down it sets a condition. It no longer matters what you have given, what you have endured, what you have tried, or what you can no longer keep giving. Everything is reduced to one immediate test. If you love, you give in. If you hesitate, you fail. If you say no, then your love becomes suspicious. And that brings us to the fourth point of this video. If you really loved me, you would do this for me. The lie that turns your love into an endless obligation. This phrase works because it attacks the moral center of a parent. No one wants to feel cold toward their child. No one wants to think they denied them something important out of selfishness. No one wants to live with the doubt of having closed the door when perhaps they should have opened it. The selfish child knows this territory, and that is why they do not always need to shout, threaten, or insult. Sometimes it is enough to place love on the table as if it were a coin meant to pay a debt. Then you are no longer evaluating a specific request. You are trying to prove that you still love them. The trap is that true love becomes held hostage by obedience. If you give money, you love. If you lend them your home, you love. If you forgive another act of abuse, you love. If you accept another act of disrespect, you love. If you cancel your plans, sacrifice your rest, ignore your limits, if you rescue them once again, then you love. And if you do not, the poisonous insinuation appears. Maybe you never loved them as much as you claimed. It is a very subtle manipulation, because it does not argue with the request. It judges your heart. That way, anyone negotiates with an advantage. You arrive with reasons and they answer with guilt. The problem is that a love subjected to endless tests stops being a bond and becomes emotional servitude. Today it is financial help. Tomorrow it will be an exception. Then it will be a lie you must tolerate so you do not abandon them. Later it will be a boundary you must remove because family supports each other. And every time you accept that logic without realizing it, you teach a dangerous lesson. Your affection only has value when it turns into concession. Your age, your exhaustion, your finances, your health, your peace do not matter. What matters is that they can keep using the word love as a master key. Seneca, who understood very well how desires without measure can enslave the soul, wrote that the poor man is not the one who has little, but the one who desires without limit. This idea sheds light on something essential. There are children who never finish feeling helped because their desire has no edge. No matter how much they receive, something is always missing. No matter how many times they are rescued, a new emergency always appears. And when desire has no limit, other people's love becomes fuel. You give once and it is not enough. You give 10 times and still it is not enough. You give for years and, strangely enough, you still have to prove that you love them. What a long test. What a generous exam for someone who never sits on the other side. In the middle of that pressure, it is worth asking yourself something honestly. Does what they're asking for help them grow, or does it only allow them to avoid another consequence? Are they asking you for love, or are they using your love to skip responsibility? Not every need is blackmail, of course not. A child can go through difficult moments and deserve support, listening, presence, even concrete help. But when the phrase, "if you loved me," appears as a tool to bend your decision, you are no longer facing a clean request. You are facing an attempt to turn your conscience into a hostage. And a parent can love deeply without accepting that their love be used like a rope around their neck. The most painful part is that when you give in under that pressure, the peace you expected rarely comes. Maybe the scene calms down for a while. Maybe your child seems grateful for a few days. Maybe the tension drops. But the pattern is reinforced. They learn that emotional accusation works. They learn that touching your guilt is more effective than taking responsibility. They learn that it is enough to put your love in doubt for your boundaries to loosen. And you learn something even sadder, that your rest, your money, your dignity, or your peace can be negotiated every time someone says the word love with enough pressure. Loving a child does not mean giving them an unlimited right over your life. It means wanting what is good for them, and sometimes what is good for them requires a refusal. It means accompanying them, but not replacing their will. It means being present, but not available for everything. It means sustaining a bond without allowing that bond to become a system of emotional extraction. When you understand this, the phrase loses part of its power. You no longer need to prove love by obeying. You can love and say no. You can love and create distance. You can love and refuse to fund what destroys them. Once this is understood, the next level appears when manipulation stops attacking your love and begins attacking your clarity. Let's pause for a moment along the way. Wisdom is not worth much if it remains only a pretty phrase. It has to enter your decisions, your difficult conversations, and the character with which you face life. That is why I wrote 5 essential books to help you bring Stoicism into your daily life, with order and depth, in a simple and practical way. And if you are still here with me, write in the comments, "My peace is not negotiable," along with the country you are watching from. Let's continue, because there is still one idea you must not overlook. Think about this. There is a form of contempt that does not always arrive with shouting, but it leaves a deep mark. It arrives disguised as a modern comment, a quick joke, impatience, that condescending look that tries to place you outside of time. You're old. You don't understand anything. And suddenly what used to be experience, memory, and judgment is being reduced to backwardness, confusion, or incapacity. Here we enter the 5th lie of this journey. You're old. You don't understand anything. The lie that uses your age to discredit your clarity and silence your boundaries. This phrase is not trying to discuss your reasons. It is trying to invalidate you before your reasons can carry any weight. Because when a selfish child cannot dismantle what you say, they attack the place you are saying it from. It is no longer about whether your boundary is fair, whether your concern has a basis, whether your observation is correct, or whether your exhaustion deserves respect. It is about making you feel out of place, old, outdated, unable to understand today's world. As if age could suddenly erase the entire life you have lived, all the crises you have overcome, all the decisions you sustained when they did not even know how to tie their shoes. The manipulation here is especially dangerous because it points to a real insecurity of old age. It does not take much lying to hurt someone. It is enough to touch the fear of losing clarity, of falling behind, of not understanding technology, new codes, today's ways of living. And from there, doubt is planted. Maybe I am exaggerating. Maybe I really do not understand anymore. Maybe my way of seeing things has become old. Little by little, the selfish child achieves something very convenient. Your experience stops being a source of authority and begins to feel like a shame you must hide. But age does not cancel judgment. Age can bring fatigue, yes. It can bring slowness in some things, changes, forgetfulness, a different relationship with the world. But it also brings an advantage that arrogant youth often despises, because it does not have it yet. Perspective. Having seen broken promises, false enthusiasm, manufactured emergencies, people who change masks, bonds that begin with affection and end in use, could it be that the problem is not that you understand nothing, but that you understand the pattern too well, the very pattern they would rather you did not see? Curiously, when your clarity makes them uncomfortable, suddenly your age becomes the problem. Seneca, reflecting on old age, observed that advanced age does not impoverish the person who has known how to live. It only exposes more clearly what has always lived in their character. That teaching carries weight here, because growing older should not make you disposable inside your own family. It should give you the right to speak with a cleaner voice, less anxious to please, freer from the need to impress. But the selfish child tries to turn that truth upside down. They want your age to become a moral disadvantage. They want every boundary you set to look like rigidity, every intuition to look like paranoia, every refusal to look like an inability to adapt. Very practical, of course. If your years have no value, then neither do your limits. And look at the full mechanism. First they ask, then they pressure. If they do not get what they want, they suggest you do not understand. If you hold your ground, they accuse you of being old, of living in another era, of not knowing how life works now. What they are trying to do is shift the subject. We are no longer talking about their irresponsibility, their demands, or their lack of respect. We are talking about your age. We are no longer talking about whether you should keep giving money, tolerating contempt, or accepting blackmail. We are talking about whether you are capable of understanding. It is a clean, quick, and cruel move, turning the judge into the accused. The question you must ask yourself is not whether you are young or old. The question is whether what you are seeing keeps repeating itself. Whether every time you set a boundary, mockery appears. Whether every time you say something sensible, they treat you as if you were confused. Whether every time you ask for respect, they respond with generational contempt. Because when someone uses your age to silence you, they are not defending the truth. They are defending their advantage. And if you accept that label, you will begin to stay quiet precisely when you most need to speak with clarity. Reclaiming your place requires not entering into that humiliation. You do not have to prove that you are still clear-minded as if you were taking an exam before your own child. Your life has already spoken enough. Your years are not a flaw that must be apologized for. They are a living memory of what you have carried, learned, and paid for. You can listen, learn, update yourself, and correct what is necessary, but you do not have to allow the word old to be used as a gag. Now that we have seen how they try to switch off your judgment, we still need to look at an even more painful pressure, when they no longer attack your mind, but what you love most. Some forms of blackmail do not need to raise their voice to destroy you inside. All it takes is a hint, a phrase dropped halfway through a conversation, a sudden distance, a visit cancelled right after you set a boundary. If you don't help me, you won't see your grandchildren. Sometimes it is not said that clearly, because cruelty also knows how to dress itself in subtlety. But the message arrives all the same. If you do not obey, you will lose access to one of the most tender parts of your life. And here we enter the sixth lie of this video. If you don't help me, you won't see your grandchildren. The lie that uses what you love most as a bargaining chip. This is one of the most devastating forms of family manipulation, because it does not touch only your guilt as a parent. It touches your love as a grandparent. It touches that place where you no longer want to raise, control, or impose, but simply watch them grow, hug them, be there, and leave a sweet memory before time does its work. The selfish child understands that vulnerable point. They know that maybe you can resist an accusation, a comparison, an insult about your age, but when they put the grandchildren on the table, they know your heart trembles in a different way, and then they turn an innocent bond into a bargaining tool. The most perverse thing about this lie is that it rarely appears all at once. It is built slowly. First, you notice that visits depend on your child's mood. Then, that the calls grow colder when you do not accept a request. Then, that fewer photos arrive, that dates become difficult, that there is always an excuse, that the children are busy, that there are plans, that it is not a good time. And of course, coincidentally, when you help, everything softens. What a delicate coincidence. Suddenly, closeness returns, smiles return, the possibility of seeing them returns, as if family love had an invisible fee. This blackmail works because it forces you to choose between two pains. If you give in, you lose dignity. If you do not, you fear losing your presence in your grandchildren's lives. And at that crossroads, many grandparents break. They pay, lend, stay silent, tolerate, apologize without having done anything serious, accept absurd conditions because the mere thought of their grandchildren growing up far away feels unbearable. How do you hold a boundary when on the other side seems to be the laughter of a child you love? That is precisely the cruelty of the mechanism. They do not appeal to your reason, they hold you by your affection. But there is a truth you need to see clearly. If someone uses children as currency, the problem is not your boundary. The problem is the person who turns a sacred bond into a pressure tool. You can make mistakes, of course. You may need to learn to speak better, not to intrude, to respect certain parenting decisions. But one thing is to put the relationship between adults in order, and something very different is to use access to your grandchildren to extract money, favors, obedience, or silence from you. That difference must be seen without disguise, because otherwise you will end up calling prudence what is really fear. The saddest part is that giving in to this blackmail does not guarantee you will keep the bond. It only teaches that the method works. Today, you accept one condition so you can see them. Tomorrow, you will have to accept another, then another. And each time the price rises a little more, because someone who has discovered they can pressure you with what you love is unlikely to give up that advantage out of simple nobility. Dignity is often lost that way, not in one great visible fall, but in small concessions made to avoid immediate pain. Until one day you look at yourself and no longer know whether you are loving or paying for permission to exist near your own family. Firmness here must be especially serene. This is not about fighting over the children as if they were anyone's property. It is not about going to war or speaking badly about their father or mother. It is about not allowing your love to be managed like an unpaid debt. You can keep a clean door open, behave with dignity, send respectful messages, be present when possible, and offer affectionate memory when there is space. But you must not destroy yourself to buy a bond that should be protected from adult disputes. Because if seeing your grandchildren always requires you to renounce your conscience, then the blackmail is no longer only affecting your relationship with them, it is affecting the relationship you have with yourself. And this requires a difficult kind of strength, perhaps one of the most difficult in all family life. To love without submitting, to wait without crawling, to be available for what is good without being available for manipulation. If you keep your dignity, the road may be slower, more painful, more uncertain, but it will also be cleaner. Because children grow, observe, remember more than it seems, and one day they may be able to tell who used the bond as a weapon and who tried to sustain it without turning it into a war. And when even that pressure begins to lose strength, one final mask remains: fragility. There is one last card that usually appears when the others begin to fail. Blaming you for the past no longer works, nor does comparing you to other parents, making you responsible for their conflicts, questioning your love, mocking your age, or using your grandchildren as pressure. So the tone changes, the voice lowers, they appear wounded, vulnerable, abandoned. I can't do this without you, you're going to leave me alone. And that is where we enter the seventh lie of this journey. I can't do this without you, you're going to leave me alone. The final lie that disguises blackmail as fragility. This phrase is so difficult to resist because it does not seem aggressive. It does not come with insults or visible threats. It comes with sadness, with a supposed need, with that air of helplessness that makes a parent feel that, if they set a boundary, they are pushing their child into the void. And of course, what parent's heart does not tremble at the possibility of leaving a child alone? The problem is that, many times, that fragility is not seeking real support, but control. It is not asking for companionship in order to grow. It is asking you to keep sustaining a dependency that has become far too useful for them to give up. Manipulative dependency has one clear characteristic. It appears precisely when your boundary begins to become firm. As long as you give, as long as you solve things, as long as you pay, as long as you tolerate, everything seems more or less stable. But when you say no, when you reduce the help, when you stop running after every crisis, suddenly the scene of abandonment appears. Now you are cruel. Now you are leaving them alone. Now their whole life supposedly falls apart if you do not return to the role of savior. How curious that their fragility awakens exactly when your dignity begins to rise. Epictetus, that teacher who taught inner freedom from a life marked by slavery and discipline, insisted that we should not make our serenity depend on the world obeying our plans. That teaching also serves a parent, because your peace cannot depend on your child approving your boundaries, and their adult life cannot depend forever on you sacrificing yours so they do not feel the weight of existing. Helping someone stand up is noble. Allowing them to use their fall as a permanent argument to keep you on your knees is something else. Here it is worth looking with painful honesty. Can they truly not do it without you, or do they not want to learn how to? Are they going through a legitimate difficulty, or are they using the idea of their fragility to stop you from changing the rules? There are children who discovered that appearing strong does not work for them, so they appear broken, not because they do not suffer at all, but because they learned that their suffering opens more doors than their responsibility. And if you do not distinguish between real pain and emotional blackmail, you will end up feeding precisely what you say you want to heal. The final lie rests on your fear of being remembered as a parent who abandoned. That is the exact wound it touches. No one wants to reach the end of life feeling that they failed their child. But there is also another question you almost never allow yourself to ask. What if failing yourself for years were also a form of abandonment? What if leaving your health, your rest, your money, your peace, and your old age in the hands of an endless dependency was not love, but a slow surrender? Guilt only shows you part of the scene. Clarity forces you to look at the whole picture. An adult child may need support, yes. They may go through real crises, dark moments, losses, illness, confusion, fear. But when every difficulty ends up demanding that you give up your limits, then you are no longer facing a specific need. You are facing a structure, and that structure feeds on a very dangerous idea, that your life must keep revolving around their inability to take responsibility. Love does not demand indifference, but it also does not demand that you become hostage to a fragility that never matures, because it always finds someone to finance it emotionally. Breaking this final lie does not mean you stop loving your child. It means you stop accepting that their dependency is more important than your right to live in peace. You can be close without being subjected. You can accompany without carrying everything. You can listen without obeying. You can love without becoming the automatic solution to a life they must learn to sustain themselves. And when you understand this, something does break, yes, but it is not the true bond. The spell breaks. If you have made it this far, you belong to that smaller group of people who refuse to settle for suffering in silence or calling every form of guilt love. You have seen how one phrase can rewrite your past, how a comparison can humiliate you, how an accusation can turn you into a scapegoat, how love can be used as an obligation, how age can be used against your clarity, how grandchildren can become a source of pressure, and how fragility can hide the final form of blackmail. Now one intimate decision remains, perhaps the most important of all: to keep living as a permanent defendant or to begin looking with more character at what is truly yours to carry. But hearing this is not enough. Real life will return in the form of a phone call, a message, a reproach, silence, or an urgent request. That is where you will find out whether you truly understood something or were only moved for a few minutes. If you have stayed until this moment, there is something in this message that deserves to stay with you. But remember, wisdom does not transform you because you heard it once. It transforms you when you practice it. In the Self-Respect Library, I brought together 5 books to help you apply Stoicism in family, loneliness, boundaries, and self-respect. And before we continue, let me know in the comments how you are today, what country you are listening from, and which part of this video spoke most directly to your life. I'm Gabriel, and this is the Stoic Garden, a space for those who have already given too much for years and now want to live the second half of life with greater clarity, firmness, and self-respect. We are not here to hate our family or harden our hearts. We are here to awaken judgment, put love in order, and remember that ancient wisdom is only useful if it helps you act better when someone tries to move your decisions through guilt. Subscribe to keep walking in this direction, because a firmer life is not built in a single video, but through repeated decisions made with serenity. Share this message with someone who needs to hear it, because sometimes one clear word arrives right before a person gives in again, where they no longer should. And next, 2 recommended videos will appear so you can continue going deeper on this path toward a life with more character, more inner peace, and more wisdom.